Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Forming Science Industry Research Collaborations, a preview and helpful tips. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the GSA website. A notice to all attendees will be distributed once the recording is available. A question and answer session will immediately follow the live presentation. We will be accepting questions through the questions feature accessible on the GoToWebinar panel. Also located there is a downloadable copy of the presentation slides. The presentation will be given by workshop organizers, Drs. Greg Samanis-Larkin of Duke University and Marty DeLima from the Standford Center on Longevity. Thank you, Greg and Marty, for bringing us this important program.
All right, thanks everyone for listening in and watching today. So I'm Greg Samanis-Larkin. I'll actually introduce myself in a moment here, but just to give you a summary of what we plan on going through in the webinar today. We're going to do a bit of an introduction. I'm going to discuss the objectives and goals. This workshop is part of a larger initiative, and I'll tell you a little bit about the history of that and the broader goals of that, and the sort of specific objectives of this workshop. We'll talk about the workshop topics and activities, how to develop a research pitch, who's eligible, how to come in with a really strong application for this, because you do have to apply and we will be selecting people for it, and you'll hear more about that as the session goes on today. And then finishing with some recommended readings and templates for researchers. So as I mentioned, I'm Greg Samanis-Larkin. I'm an assistant professor of psychology and neuroscience at Duke University. I'm also a member of the Duke Center for Interdisciplinary Decision Science, and that center has partnered with the Standford Center on Longevity to create this initiative on creating partnerships between academia and industry. And this was initially started from some, conversations of frustration between Laura Carstensen and I. So this is also co-led by Laura Carstensen at the Standford Center on Longevity, who's the founding director of that center. And we were, complaining about how tough it is to create these collaborations, but how critical and important they are. And so decided together with, Marty, can you put back one? So together with Martha Deavy and Marty DeLima at Standford Center on Longevity, we wrote a grant to the National Institute on Aging to try to create opportunities to help other people not have to go through the same struggles and kind of trial and error mistakes that Laura and I have both gone through in trying to create some of these partnerships for ourselves. So I just want to emphasize that although Laura and I are principal investigators on the grant that funds this actual workshop and all of the activities that surround it, the initiative, this particular workshop and just everything we're done has been really strongly led by Marty and Martha, and you will hear from Marty will take over momentarily in a few slides. So to get to the idea of just why we think this is important in general, why Laura and I have spent our time struggling to make this happen, there are great strengths on both sides in academia. So we, exist, Laura and I, in academia, where our goal is to build knowledge, and we have all of this expertise and these specific research methods training to try to study and reveal very specific things in well-controlled ways in the laboratory. And so we have all of these skills of pinpointing specific processes or functions in well-controlled ways in the lab. And we think we come up with good questions and interesting questions about how the human mind and brain works, how people behave in a laboratory setting. But that's pretty limited, right? So that's maybe not necessarily how people behave in the real world. So we would love to know if what we learned from the lab actually applies to a real life. So industry partners or firms, companies, startups, whatever, people that are operating more in the real world than we are in academia have at least the opportunity to, even if they're not actually doing it, but collecting much more applied data. So that, how are people actually behaving, what are the choices that they're making, just looking at real world behavior from humans. There's also potential for larger financial resources to support these kinds of activities, and then having a broader population to study. So in academia, we're often relying, especially for those of us doing human subjects research, we're just relying on sort of the generosity of people willing to come in and give us their time. But that often means we're limited to people who are willing to do that. Whereas if you're a company, you just have all of the customers that are a less kind of selective sample often than we have in academia. And so there's a lot that industry could contribute to academia, but this is just really hard to do. It sounds great, there are strengths on both sides, why don't we work together? There are a lot of barriers. And so there are a lot of things that make this really hard, even though it is a good idea. So there are different values and goals on both sides. There's proprietary data, so there's some data that we just can't access, or it's valuable to the company and they don't want it shared. There are reputational risks. What if we, as an academic partner, discover that a company is doing something that doesn't really benefit all of their clients, or it benefits certain clients more than others? And so we run the risk of exposing this, like an issue at the company more publicly. There are regulatory issues that we don't normally have to deal with in academia. There's conflicts of interest. This kind of going back, this is related to the different goals and values. Companies are often trying to sell a product. In academia, we don't often, or we shouldn't, have so much of an agenda for how a study, like how a result will turn out. There's employee turnover. This is a really tough one because you spend a lot of time investing in a relationship with an industry partner, somebody at an industry partner, and management changes. So people leave and the project is dead, or there's different priority now. And also just the lack of access points. Like, how do we do this? And so part of the goal of this is to figure out how to do this. So the idea is that there's great potential for combining the strengths of both academia and industry through these collaborations and building these partnerships together. It is hard. And so part of what we're doing in this workshop is trying to facilitate making that happen. And we've done, there's been a couple of years of lead up to this workshop that will be coming soon to GSA. And so a lot of that is focused on, like, how can we share this knowledge that we've built and advice to help people be able to do this. So the main objective of the workshop is equip early career social scientists with strategies for identifying, approaching, and collaborating on research with a private sector partner. We're focusing on improving communication with representatives from industry. We often speak different languages, and so how can we communicate better? Anticipate potential barriers, failure points, rules, limitations, of which there are many of all those things. Refining a pitch for collaborating. So you might just be a scientist who thinks you have a cool study idea and there's some company that has the data for it. You're not just going to knock on their door and say, hey, can I do this at your company? So there's a lot more to that, and that will be a focus of the workshop. And then just outlining a plan of engagement, like how would this collaboration proceed, assuming it does work out. And now I will actually turn it over to Marty.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Greg, for the introduction to the aims and objectives. So as Greg shared already, my name is Marty DeLima, and I'm one of the organizers of the workshop, and I am from the Standford Center on Longevity. I work with Dr. Laura Carstensen. So this is a photo of our inaugural class. The first training we held over 2 days, actually, at Stanford University in the fall. But we're really excited to bring the workshop to GSA's conference in Austin and hope that we can reach more early career researchers through a partnership. So in my portion of the webinar, I'm going to present the topics that the workshop will cover. I'll go over eligibility criteria and give you some tips on how to apply. And I'll also talk about logistics and travel. So here's how the day will work. There'll be some lecture and some breakout sessions. So the lecture portion will provide a primer on the private sector environment, things like corporate values, what motivates them, certain business lingo, business cycles. And then the lectures will also focus a bit on the logistics of collaborating, like research agreements, data transfer agreements, conflicts of interest, and things of that nature. And then in the breakout session, you'll be meeting in a small group of your peers, so maybe about 4 other researchers, and you'll be matched with a mentor from the private sector. So in these breakouts, you are going to present your research pitch for collaborating. So what's a research pitch? This is something that we asked last year's accepted applicants to come to the workshop prepared with. It could be like a short slide deck or a short slide presentation, I should say, so under 10 slides, or like a page-long elevator speech. Essentially, it should outline the problem that you want to solve, the specific research question you want to answer, and also how that research question, or at least maybe the answer to that question, will benefit the organization that you want to work with. So it should cover like why you want to collaborate the company, like what you need or expect from them. So here are the components of the research pitch. Of course, you know, thinking about maybe your specific aims if you were to apply to an NIA grant. So statement of the problem. But importantly, this is what I really want you to hit on, is not just why is it a problem for individuals or for society, but why might it also be a problem for the company or the industry you're focused on in general, like healthcare or finance. The second part of the research pitch is the research question or the proposed intervention. So kind of what is it you want to do? And then the plan, like how are you going to do it? But importantly, what are your needs? So this is kind of comes into why do you need this collaborator involved? Do you need access to patients or customers? Or maybe you're interested in doing work in long-term care, so you need access to residents. Maybe it's administrative data that the company already collects. And then finally, outcomes. So, you know, what are the intended results? If there were like a press release that were written about your study after it was all finished, what would it highlight? What would it say? So my advice is that last year's applicants spent a lot of time on the first two bullet points and not enough time on the third and fourth. And those are really important too, because they get at the so what. So last year, we interviewed the mentors who were participating in the event, and we asked them for their advice on how to form these science industry partnerships. So the video clip that I'm going to show you, and I just have to switch over, is of Bryce Williams. He's from Blue Shield of California. He's a health insurer, which is a health insurer. And Bryce is talking about how to organize your research pitch. So I apologize for the very poor quality of this video. Bryce I'm not a very good camera woman, and I was trying to do it all at this workshop, so he's a little blurry.
My big piece of advice actually to both of the mentees so far has been get to the so what really quickly. So in academics, like you build up your treatise, your supposition, your hypothesis, your X, Y, and Z, right? But private sector is used to very quick, like give me the facts, tell me why I should care, what are we going to do about it, what should we expect about it. So I think my biggest advice was get to the so what. Right? Not a lot of big wordy slides, not a lot of dense technological terms. Just say, this is the problem, this is why it matters, this is how I can help, this is how we're both going to benefit. And then, right, that'll spur their interest, and then you can get into more of a dialogue.
Okay, so basically Bryce's point was, you know, lead with the so what and avoid the lengthy setup that is really common in many of our academic presentations. Okay, so we will do our best to partner the researchers with a mentor from the industry that they're interested in working with. So, you know, let's say you have a behavioral economics focus, you know, we'll seek out a finance professional. Maybe you have a clinical intervention idea, we'll look for people from healthcare or insurance companies. Maybe you're interested in caregiving, so we'll look at home care agencies. We really put a lot of time into trying to find the right fit between the mentors and the mentees, but the fit is not always perfect. So it's important to avoid academic jargon in your research pitch and explain, you know, your project, your idea in simple layman's terms. I also want to mention that last year's group of trainees came from all different disciplines. So, and also given how interdisciplinary GSA's members are, we expect the same in Austin. So that means that other people in your small group will try to keep like with like. It's possible that you might be an occupational therapist, but the person sitting next to you is an economist. So again, this is just another reason to make your pitch broad enough that it can be understood by people from who use different methodologies and have different theoretical backgrounds. All right, so the role of the mentors. So of course, they're going to help you refine your research pitch. Is it concise, free of jargon? Do you make a compelling business case for the research? And also, is it feasible? Are you asking for the moon, or is what you're asking for totally possible? Also, they'll help you brainstorm potential engagement strategies, so ways to get your foot in the door, and I'll talk more about that later. And then also help you think about some issues or concerns from the private sector perspective. A major focus of the training is teaching researchers how to align their research goals with the goals of a company or an organization. So this is really essential for quote unquote selling the company on a collaboration. You have to think, how will the outcome of my proposed project impact this company? Will it improve customer or patient satisfaction? Will it make things more efficient? Will it drive growth or new customer acquisition? Will it allow the company to have a competitive edge or like be a leader in this industry? And I recognize that many of you are probably thinking to yourself, like, no way, my research doesn't do any of those things. You know, my goal as a researcher is to advance science, you know, not drive business decisions. And I want to say that that's fine too, because really to be successful, your research doesn't have to speak to these profit-driven metrics. You can also appeal to a company's social mission. And the next clip is of Surya Kalari from Bank of America Merrill Lynch. And he is talking about mission statements and how important these are for organizations. So this clip is actually clear, it's sharp, but the audio is poor. So again, I apologize.
Companies take their missions very seriously, they craft it carefully, and employees and executives up and down the chain try to live that company's mission. So a researcher, if they make an effort to understand what the company's mission is, it makes the dialogue that much easier. And there are many ways in which a researcher could understand and learn about the company's mission. For example, they could read their company's annual report, which would be all infused with the company's mission. They could look at, sometimes companies have corporate social responsibility reports. They can read those. CEOs of companies or senior executives of companies are being interviewed all the time. And those interviews are crafted with care because senior executives convey the company's mission in their answers. So there are many ways in which one can easily identify what the mission of a company is. And one doesn't need to parrot the mission, but if one can be in the spirit of that mission, it will make the conversation easier.
Okay, so basically just to summarize, Surya's advice is to craft the research pitch, like he said, in the spirit of the company's mission. And you can find the company's mission statement in their annual report. You can watch interviews with senior executives and also look to see if they have a social responsibility report. And I'm going to play another clip for you from Surya that's a little shorter, and it talks about the social mission.
Companies take their missions very seriously, they craft it carefully, and employees and executives up and down the chain try to live that company's mission. If a company has a social purpose that they have articulated in their mission, such as being environmentally friendly or improving financial literacy, then the research pitch could incorporate improvements in those social areas, which would also be equally attractive in terms of engagement.
Okay, sorry about that. I played the same clip twice, but the second clip, he was talking about goal alignment again, and this again speaks to why your research doesn't have to speak necessarily to profit-driven metrics, but it can also, you can also think about how will insights from my research impact the social responsibility goals of this company. And Surya used the examples of environmental sustainability and financial literacy. But of course, you might be focused on patient health or customer satisfaction, well-being in the workplace, diversity, or reducing economic inequality. So I'm going to shift gears here and talk about engagement. So this is sometimes the hardest step for researchers. You might have a fantastic idea, but have no one to present it to. So let's say once you have developed your research pitch, your next step is to actually share it. So your mentor will work with you to identify how to get your foot in the door at the organization. And this is really essential because you need an influential advocate within a company to drive the research forward. And it's best if that person has decision-making authority and good relationships with other employees, maybe across the chain of command. And other things to note are the possibility of a lot of turnover, people change roles or they're promoted. So it's best to foster ties with multiple people. But how do you do this? So some ideas that have been generated in our preparation for these workshops: you might be invited to write a blog post for their trade organization, or maybe it's speaking at one of their corporate events or to their board of advisors. Maybe it's looking through your university's alumni network to see if anyone works at that company and who you might be able to reach out to. So there's a number of different strategies that you'll talk about with your mentor. Okay, culture and communication. So the workshop will highlight these differences in norms. So last year's mentors stressed the importance of academics giving frequent, almost to the point of incessant updates about how the research is going and what's happening. So this is after the engagement has started. So one thing you might want to know is that for many companies, their relationship or their experiences with research come from relationships with paid research vendors. So they might hire a company to do a customer survey or focus group or customer analytics. And in those cases, that research organization is a client of this company. So of course, if you're an academic researcher coming into these collaborations, you're not a client, you're a collaborator. But it still, benefits you to offer frequent updates and communication. Another thing that the workshop will cover and talk about is your online presence. So do you use LinkedIn? Do you use Twitter? Do you have a personal website? All these things make you more, I guess you could say, discoverable and easier to engage with from the perspective of people in private industry. So the last clip I'm going to show you is of Charlene Wu. Charlene got her PhD from Stanford in psychology, and then she went on to found the behavioral science lab at Uber, and now she works at Airbnb as the lead social scientist. So she has great perspective from both sides, academia and industry.
Okay, so the research culture can vary organization to organization, but I think the one thing that's generally true compared to an academic setting is the focus on understanding the practicality of the research question and what implications, consequences, decisions, and business actions would come immediately following those recommendations. And another thing to note is also the timelines. The timelines piece really connects to the practicality piece. In research, the deadlines can be a little bit longer because you're taking time to gather insights, understand how this augments, complements, extends an existing theory. Whereas in a business organization, especially in a tech company, we're looking at how quickly can we get an answer to a question so that we can implement this in our business as quickly as end of the week, 2 weeks, a month, etc. So I think the timing depends on the urgency to solve the business need.
Okay, so Charlene's take-home point is that companies expect research to happen really quickly, and if you say you're going to get something done by a certain date, you actually make sure that happens. And in research, we're a little bit more flexible with our timelines. And also, she talks about how research needs to serve a practical need, and that doesn't mean that you as a researcher should abandon theory necessarily or scientific rigor in your research proposal, but it just means that you should highlight the practical applications of the research. All right, so another thing that the workshop will cover is the risks of public-private research collaborations. The stakes are a lot higher. So, we as scholars tend to think of ourselves as benign actors. We're out there, our goals to advance science. We're not trying to steal trade secrets or uncover controversy or fraud. But of course, those can be unintended consequences. You might uncover something that your collaborator wouldn't want you to know, and especially wouldn't want the public to know. Like what if despite your best intentions and best practices, you leak their private data or their customers' data? Those are some serious, serious harms. And you want to openly discuss them and plan for them prior to the engagement getting underway. So we recommend that before starting any project, you and the collaborator work together to come up and to generate protocols for managing those potential problems. Okay, and then conflicts of interest. So we'll discuss your responsibility as an academic researcher affiliated with probably a college or a university. You might already be having questions like, can the company fund this research but also be considered a collaborator? And then after it's all over, what if they want me to manipulate the outcomes or leave out certain findings that make them not look so great? Who owns the data? Do I own it or do they own it after the project? Can they force me not to publish on certain findings? Do I have to de-identify them in the paper if they ask me to? So we'll try to spend some time on that and get those types of questions answered. Okay, so by the end of the workshop, you should have worked with your mentor to identify one or more potential collaborators. Maybe you already come into the workshop with one collaborator in mind. Also, you will have outlined ways to engage, refined your research pitch, and thought about some of the risks and conflicts of interest. All right, so I'm going to switch gears now and talk about eligibility, and then I'll talk about the application and the coordination and travel for the workshop. First, eligibility. So this workshop is funded by the NIA, and it's a training for early career researchers. And by that, we mean assistant professors, postdocs, and PhD students advanced to candidacy. And I'll add advanced to candidacy by the time the workshop rolls around in November. That's not a hard and fast rule. If you have a fantastic idea, if you've started a collaboration but want some tips and helpful tools, you are welcome to apply, but just know that we are prioritizing PhD students who have advanced to candidacy versus those who are just starting out in grad school. All disciplines are welcome, particularly the social and health sciences like psychology, sociology, economics, demography. We strongly, strongly encourage women and minorities to apply. And because this is federally funded, priority will be given to US citizens and those holding a J1, F1 visas. And I apologize if anyone from last year's event are tuning into this webinar. This is for new participants only. And the last bullet point is very important, and I will talk about this multiple times through the end of the this webinar. You must be able to attend all, and then as a side note, or most of the workshop, and I'll talk about what I mean by that. Okay, here's almost the same information, just reframed. So this workshop is great for those of us, who are social and health scientists. If you are an engineer or like a bench scientist, maybe a biologist or chemist, this is probably not the right fit. So there is a long history of the biological and engineering sciences working hand in hand with private industry to bring scientific discoveries to commercial realization. So the focus of this particular workshop is not going to be on technology licensing or patents or commercializing devices, technologies, and it's not going to be developing drug treatments. So if that is your focus, if that's where you are, you're not going to find what you need in this particular workshop. Social sciences, on the other hand, don't have this strong history of working with the private sector on research questions. So also this workshop is right for you if you've thought a lot about, how your research would benefit from these collaborations. If your question is best answered working with data, patients, customers, clients, employees, or their settings, and also if you can commit to attending the full day. Okay, applications. So I helped screen the applications for last year, and my main tip is to be specific. So who do you want to work with? What is it that you need from them? And why do you need to do your research through a collaboration versus using other methods? So good research proposals, or I should say good applications. address why the private sector company would want to collaborate with you. You know, what's in it for them? What can you offer? Also, another aspect of applications that meet the mark is that they explain why the research question can't be answered using other more traditional research methods. Like, why can't you just recruit participants to come into the lab using advertisements or flyering? Why can't you collect this data using an online panel or analyze a publicly available data set? So really, what is it about working with an industry partner that answers your research question in a way that these other methods cannot? And then finally, and this is really important, that you understand and you can communicate what resources you need. Is it that this company has a data set that is proprietary, but that you really think would have insights to your research question? Is it that you need a population of patients, or maybe you want to work in the company with their employees, and maybe you also need funding? Okay, so proposals that miss the mark treated the proposed private sector collaborator as a research vendor. What do I mean by that? Let's say you want to do a study on sleep and you need someone to create a sleep app for you so that your participants can log their nighttime sleep. Well, that's not a collaboration. Again, you need someone to develop a piece of software for your research. Here's another example. Let's say you're interested in physical activity patterns and how it relates to health, and you want to recruit a couple hundred participants and get Fitbits for all of them so that you can record their caloric expenditure and their steps. And you say in your application that you want to collaborate with Fitbit. Well, I would say that that's probably not a true collaboration. That would be a budget line in your grant that you need to, buy a couple hundred Fitbits for your participants. However, if you said you're interested in how physical activity relates to urban, suburban, and rural living and how that impacts health, well, maybe you need data points from thousands and thousands of people residing in those areas so that you can build some links. Maybe then collaborating with Fitbit or another activity tracker company would make sense because they already are collecting all of that data from their customers. All right, also proposals that missed the mark didn't have anything to do, the research didn't have anything to do with health or financial well-being or mental well-being over the life course. They weren't specific enough, so they didn't name what resources they needed. Some named research institutes as potential collaborators, not private sector companies. So let's say you want to work with RAND because they have some data set that you want to analyze. Well, that's not really a collaboration. Just wanting funding also is not a collaboration. That's a relationship between a sponsor and a sponsee, or a grantor and a grantee. And then finally, bad research proposals didn't make a case for why the private sector would be interested or benefit from the research. Okay, so now the down low. So applications are due on August 16th. It's a Qualtrics survey. That's how the application is set up with free response panels. It should take, fields. It should take you about an hour to complete. We will notify you in early September, so a couple weeks turnaround. The workshop will take place at the JW Marriott in Austin. That's one of the conference hotels. It will be on Thursday, November 14th. That is one of the days of the conference. So this is not scheduled during the pre-conference workshop time, which means that there will be concurrent sessions going on. There'll be a poster session. There'll be the opening remarks. The keynote speaker will happen on this day. So that's really important for that last point at the bottom of this slide. If you get your GSA abstract notification in July and find out that you are presenting on Thursday, how should you handle that? So you can be excused if you're presenting or if you're the session discussant for your session in which you're presenting. So that one and a half hour concurrent session. But you have to tell us ahead of time. So if you're accepted and you're presenting on that day, you must send us an email. We spend a lot of time trying to match the trainees with a mentor. And we need to know what time it is so that we can rearrange the groups and have everything be balanced. So please let us know if you're accepted and you've agreed to come, but are also presenting. Let's say you're not presenting, but one of your students is presenting or your co-author is presenting and you really want to go to that talk. If you really want to go to that talk, this is probably not the right workshop for you. So if you decide last minute that you want to leave to go to a talk, and then you leave for the rest of the day, we will not reimburse your hotel. So it's kind of, I hate to draw the line in the sand, but this is the kind of the penalty for getting accepted. Again, we have limited funding. There's a lot of people who want to take this. We can't accept as many people as will apply. So if you're accepted and you commit, we expect you to be there all day unless you're presenting and you have told us in advance. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, I'll talk a little bit about travel. So we will pay for your flights directly. For those who are accepted, we will get you set up with a link to Agencia, that's Stanford's travel vendor. You'll select your flights, we'll approve them, and we'll pay for them directly. For your hotel, you'll book your hotel as you normally do for GSA if you go to GSA, and we will reimburse for the Wednesday night before the workshop and the Thursday night of the workshop. And we'll also reimburse your ground transportation. Of course, you might be staying at the hotel for 4 nights, 5 nights, but we will just reimburse for those 2 nights, before the workshop and after the workshop. Do you have to register for the conference to come to this workshop? No. So you are able to come to this workshop whether or not you're a GSA member and whether or not you decide to register for the annual scientific meeting. Okay, so now that those logistics are out of the way, here is a list of some recommended readings on how the factors that make collaboration succeed or fail. I want to give a shout out to the last bullet point here. That's a researcher's guide to working with industry. This is a PDF from Stanford and it's excellent. It kind of goes through the nuts and bolts of these collaborations. And then resources. So maybe you're further along in this process and you want to know, okay, well, actually, how do we execute this? So these are lists of sample templates like NDAs, so non-disclosure agreements, things like data transfer agreements and research agreements. So this will be really helpful as you move along. Okay, so now that we've wrapped up, I'm happy to take questions. Greg and I are happy to take questions about the workshop, about the application process, eligibility, travel. And then I will say, in case any of you are like, how do we actually do this? On this final slide has information on where to apply and our email addresses if you have specific questions. But I'll go back to this slide and open the floor to questions.
Terrific. Thank you, Marty. So just a reminder to everyone, you can type and send questions using the questions feature in the dashboard. That should be accessible on the right-hand side of your screen. We're not using the raised hand feature today. So if you have a question, please be sure to type that into the panel. And again, just a friendly reminder, we are recording the session. So we'll send you an access link by email once that is available. And it's the same page where you probably registered. You'll find all the details in the recordings and, again, a copy of the slides at geron.org/webinar. I have a question here. Let's see here. Thank you so much for the presentation. Is there a way to look ahead of time at the contents of the Qualtrics survey so we can prepare our materials before we begin?
Oh, that's a great question. So here's what I would recommend. So there's not, and I thought about this before, but what you should do is you should go to the web page, click on apply here or apply now. It's like a button on the right-hand side, and just click through the Qualtrics, but don't click submit at the bottom, and then just X out of it. So yeah, you can read through the questions, copy and paste them into like a Word document, and then X out before you submit. I mean, if you submit, it'll just come up as a blank Qualtrics response on my end. But yeah, so that's how you should do it. So don't worry about going through the survey without submitting. It doesn't mean that you can't apply again.
Great. There's a question here. How many people are typically apply and how many are accepted?
So I expect around, you know, depending on how many people apply, maybe a 30% acceptance rate. And we accept, sorry, I missed your question. We're looking to accept between 25 and 35 applicants.
Great. And then one question, how do you coordinate the timing of the partnership if you're needing or wanting or waiting for grant funding?
Oh, so this is more about, so that's a great question. I would start with coordinating the partnership and then apply for grants as they pop up. It's best to start these relationships and build these relationships early than waiting for funding and then trying to build a partnership. In fact, I think it would be really hard to get funding for a project if you can't show the funder that this collaboration or this relationship that you've built can go somewhere. So I would say, you know, if I were NIA and you were talking about how you're going to work with Facebook to look at older adults' social media use and connections, that NIA would, you know, say, I don't know, is Facebook really going to be open to sharing their data, especially after what happened in 2016. So again, I would say start with building the relationship and then go to grant funding. And Greg, maybe you have a different perspective on that, but I think that it's harder to build the relationship than it is to fund the project.
I agree. Yeah.
Excellent. I am planning a qualitative study with state-level Medicare surveyors. Would you consider them an industry partner?
I think so. We had a few applicants last year who proposed working with state agencies or federal agencies. While the goals of those type of agencies are typically different than a corporation, many of the barriers are the same. So if you are interested in working with a state agency, for example, I study elder abuse and financial exploitation, so Adult Protective Services is a state organization we work with quite often, and we face hurdles all the time. So I encourage you to apply.
Thank you. I have a unique faculty appointment and will be graduating in December with a DNP. Who should I contact to see how my eligibility fits?
So you should contact myself. Let me flip it over to the next slide. I'm the first person, Marty DeLima. You can also contact Martha Deavy with questions on eligibility.
Thank you. I am really very interested in the session, but my schedule for November remains unclear. Can I still apply even if I might have to step away later or back out later?
Yeah, so what I recommend you doing is apply. Then in September, we'll notify you, and part of the notification will be, you know, a request for you to commit. And at that point, hopefully in September, which will only be a couple months before November, you will have a better idea of your schedule. So also I will say that GSA abstract notifications are coming out in July. So by the time the application deadline rolls around, you'll already know if your abstract was accepted and what day you're presenting. So if you get your abstract notifications back and you find out that you're presenting twice on Thursday, then I say this is probably not the right year for you to apply to this workshop, because you'll have to step out for a total of 3 hours, which is quite a large chunk of time. If you find out you're presenting, plus your student is presenting, plus your co-author is presenting on Thursday, and you really want to see the keynote, again, probably not right for you. So that is my recommendation about should you apply, because we'll give you another chance to say yes or no. And then based on how many people ultimately can't make it or decline, we might go back to the drawing board with the applicants and kind of invite others to participate.
Great. Thank you. Is it recommended that we have our partnership established in order to have a competitive application?
No, that's not at all a requirement. It's best if you've thought about this partnership and thought, especially in detail, about what resources you need, and maybe you know what resources this organization has, but you don't have to have one established. Like, let's say you want to work, you want to study caregiving behaviors in assisted living, or how people decide to make the transition from kind of independent assisted living into memory care assisted living. But you haven't decided, do you want to work with like Silverado, or what's another, Sunrise Senior Living, and you haven't decided which one, that's fine. You can come in with kind of a strong research plan, but kind of a broad idea of who to collaborate with.
Great, thank you. Is this workshop appropriate for a researcher who has been approached by an industry partner who wants their product tested and published? From what I heard today, this workshop is more for researchers who have an idea but need a corporate partner to carry it out.
So I would say it's not. I would say also to think really hard about those types of requests also, and conflict of interest there, and reputational risks of testing a corporate entity's products or services. It's more for researchers who have an idea that would benefit from these collaborations. I'll give you some ideas. So this is something that Greg and I have talked about. We're interested in financial decision making as people age, and Greg has done this. You bring people into a lab. You might put them in a scanner. You ask them all these hypothetical behavioral economics questions. You see how they respond. But all of those behaviors and decisions are all in a lab. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could actually look at how people spend money, and look at their credit card spending, and look at their checking account, and see if we can, predict changes in financial decision making and behavior over the life course by looking at people's actual financial accounts. So we might want to work with, a Bank of America or a Chase Bank. So because we're interested in decision making in an applied setting. Here's another example. Let's say you are a researcher, but you're at a really small liberal arts school. There's not a medical school attached to your campus, but you have this idea for decision making between patients and their provider. So how do doctors talk about end-of-life decision making? And you have a decision aid, a tool that you want to get into the hands of practitioners. So then again, you might want to collaborate with a large health organization in order to access their providers and access their patient population. Because you can't really test that decision aid in a lab. So again, it's questions that you'd get a better answer to your research question if you were working in an applied setting with applied populations, or people who are actually faced with these decisions in their lives.
Great. One question here. Thank you for the presentation. On the application, do we need to address the, do we need to provide a specific name of a private sector organization, or can we just address that we would like to collaborate with, say, in general, local nursing home facility?
Yeah, that's fine as well. That's okay.
Great. Marty or Greg, do you have any last comments about the upcoming workshop and the application process for the workshop?
Just that these are challenging relationships to build, much harder than finding another academic collaborator. But we hope that this workshop gives people guideposts and gives them the confidence they need so that if they were ever to have 5 minutes in front of a CEO of a major organization, they'd be able to give their research pitch, and the organization would find it compelling and say, yeah, let's work together.
I don't have anything else. Thanks, everybody, for listening in today.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Greg and Marty. It's been a real pleasure learning about forming science industry research collaborations. Thank you to everyone for participating. This is the end of the program.